They fired me 3 days before Christmas. 18 years building the systems that ran everything. Gone. Replaced by 3 junior engineers who cost less than me. I walked out with a cardboard box. They walked into a disaster they couldn't see yet. Because there's one thing about legacy infrastructure nobody tells you. It doesn't break loudly. It breaks slowly, quietly, and by the time anyone notices, it's too late. My name is Victoria Hale. I'm 55, Latina, daughter of immigrants who taught me to document everything because nobody else will tell your story for you. That habit, that obsessive documentation, it's about to become the most expensive lesson a tech company ever learned. See, they thought firing me would save money. Simple math. 1 expensive architect gone, 3 cheap engineers hired, quarterly costs down, executives happy. But here's what they didn't calculate. I didn't just build those systems. I knew why every single piece existed, every redundancy, every failsafe, every patch holding together code written before half the company was born. And I knew exactly what would break first when nobody was there to catch it. The calls started on a gray morning, days after Christmas. Minor instabilities, they said. Then systems crashed. Payments froze. Clients left. Consultants made it worse. And I didn't answer a single call. Not because I'm petty, because I'd spent 18 years being essential and invisible at the same time. And I finally learned the most dangerous lesson in corporate America. Sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's letting them see what happens when you're gone. This is the story of how I watched a company collapse in real time while I built something better. How I discovered my firing wasn't about performance. It was calculated months before a company sale. And how silence became the most powerful response I'd ever given. By the end, I didn't just get my career back. I got it on my own terms. The conference room had gold string lights wrapped around fake garland, but none of that holiday cheer reached the executive floor where I sat with my hands folded in my lap. 3 days before Christmas, and the email that called me in had been too short for something this close to the holidays. 18 years. That's how long I'd been reading corporate silences, the kind that come before bad news. This one felt familiar. The new CTO smiled like he was wishing me happy holidays in the hallway, not ending my career. He talked about numbers, projections, optimization. It's nothing personal, Victoria. I'd heard versions of that line my whole life. Always said right before someone did something very personal. When he finally said my position was being eliminated for cost efficiency, something in my chest contracted. Didn't break, just compressed. 3 junior engineers cost less than me. That was his math. Simple, inevitable, modern. Nobody mentioned those systems ran because I knew them like my own breathing. I thanked him, took the severance folder, asked one polite question, almost automatic. No argument, no tears, no threat of lawyers. My calm seemed to bother him more than any outburst would have. He looked away, like someone who realizes too late they just underestimated the wrong person. Minutes later, I was clearing my desk. 18 years fit into one cardboard box. Worn notebook, cracked mug, forgotten photos. Coworkers stared at screens, avoiding eye contact. Not cruelty, fear. I knew that fear well. Walking through the lobby past the enormous Christmas tree, someone called out, "Happy Holidays," behind me. Outside, the December air felt more honest than anything I'd heard in that room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired and clear. I learned early that the world wouldn't be gentle by default. My parents came from Latin America and built their lives with effort and silence. I was born here, carrying 2 inheritances: opportunity and the constant demand to prove I deserved it. From childhood, I understood, mistakes cost more when you come from outside, even if you're born inside. In college, I was one of maybe 5 women in lecture halls dominated by men. Almost always the only one with a Latina last name. I worked twice as hard, spoke half as much, watched more than I commented. Not shyness, strategy. I let the work speak first because my voice wasn't always heard immediately. When I joined the company, back when it was still small, I saw what others missed. Potential, yes, but also structural fragility. While people thought about titles and promotions, I thought about foundations. I spent nights designing systems, predicting failures, building redundancies. Not for recognition, because I believe things built right protect people. The company grew, changed names, changed owners, changed mission statements. I stayed, became the quiet reference point. The person everyone called when something broke, but rarely remembered when everything worked. I was too reliable to celebrate, too essential to question, or so I thought. At home, Work was never the main topic. For me, success always meant stability, not applause. Building something that lasted longer than quarterly decisions. That was how I honored my parents' sacrifices. They'd cross borders so I wouldn't have to cross invisible lines every single day. That's why the firing hurt less for the lost position and more for what it meant. It wasn't just the end of a professional chapter, it was confirmation that, to some people, I'd never stop being replaceable, no matter what I'd built. That night, while Christmas lights blinked in neighbors' windows, I understood something with uncomfortable clarity. Maybe it was time to stop proving my value to people who never wanted to see it completely. Most people didn't know exactly how it all worked, and almost nobody cared as long as it worked well. For me, though, every server, every integration, every security layer had a story. I remembered the day I decided not to follow a standard template because I knew the company would scale too fast for generic solutions. I built something living, adaptable, resistant to human error. This wasn't just code. This was a map of decisions made over nearly 2 decades. Responses to crises nobody else remembered. Improvised solutions that became standards. Every hidden redundancy existed because, at some point, something had gone wrong. And I learned prevention was always cheaper than repair. The company never funded proper documentation. "We'll do it later," they said. I insisted. Sent reports. Always there was a more urgent priority, a quarter to close, a bonus to justify. Eventually, I understood the knowledge would stay concentrated in me, not from ego, from their negligence. I didn't hide information. I explained whenever people asked. Problem was, almost nobody listened to the end. Technical presentations were seen as obstacles, not warnings. When I talked about risks, they heard complexity. When I talked about stability, they heard slowness. The system worked so well it became invisible. Executives started believing that was normal, automatic, guaranteed. They didn't see that the silence of alerts was the result of constant, meticulous, deeply human work. Now, sitting outside that world, I knew the silence wouldn't last. Ignored systems charge their price, not from revenge, from logic. And logic, unlike speeches, doesn't care about cost-cutting. The change started with pretty words. Modernization. Efficiency. Growth mindset. The new CTO arrived with slick presentations and almost no real curiosity. He was in a hurry to leave his mark, show quick results to people who only looked at numbers. Then came the consultants, young, confident, armed with charts and ready-made solutions. They talked about universal platforms, total replacement, starting from zero. When I explained why that wouldn't work, I got polite smiles and empty stares, like I was speaking an ancient language. Slowly, they stopped inviting me to strategy meetings. Decisions got made without considering deep technical impacts. I was only called when something broke. And even then, treated like support staff, not the architect of the system. I felt the displacement but resisted believing the worst. Part of me still trusted that competence would be recognized eventually. After all, everything depended on what I'd built, seemed too logical to ignore. At home, the warnings came clearer. "They're pushing you out," someone told me one night. I heard it, didn't answer. Acknowledging that meant accepting that years of loyalty guaranteed nothing. The new management didn't see legacy. They saw cost. And when cost becomes the only lens, everything that doesn't fit in a spreadsheet becomes disposable, including people who quietly hold up what keeps the company standing. The security guard was too polite, which made everything more awkward. He walked a few steps behind me through the hallways, like I might suddenly do something inappropriate with my own past. The cardboard box weighed more for what it symbolized than what it contained. Every step seemed to echo decisions that weren't mine. Desks decorated for Christmas, cards with generic gratitude messages, forced laughter near the coffee machine. Everything continued normally, as if nothing had been ripped out of place minutes before. That's how it works. The company moves forward even when someone gets left behind. I stopped for a moment in front of my empty desk, remembered the first time I sat there, years ago, full of ideas and caution. No bitterness, just a strange feeling of premature closure, like a book ending before the last chapter. In the elevator, I ran into a colleague who tried to smile but looked away. He mumbled something about unfair and ridiculous, but said nothing more. I didn't blame him. Corporate courage usually has a short shelf life. When I reached the parking garage, the cutting cold made me breathe deep. I put the box on the passenger seat and closed the door carefully, like I was storing something fragile. There, alone, I let myself feel the full impact. Didn't cry, just stayed there a few seconds, silent, letting reality settle. Starting the car, I realized this was my first step outside a place where I'd always felt necessary but never truly valued. And without knowing it yet, this would also be the first step towards something bigger. Christmas came without rush, like it was respecting the delicate moment I was crossing. The house was decorated simply, soft lights, smell of fresh coffee, distant sound of old songs creating a quiet refuge away from corporate noise. Sitting by the window, I watched snow fall while holding a warm mug between my hands. For the first time in years, no notifications, no urgent calls, no systems to monitor. The silence, initially uncomfortable, started transforming into something close to relief. Family tried not to touch the subject directly, but support lived in small gestures. Longer hugs, plates served with care, questions asked without pressure. I realized how much I'd normalized carrying everything alone. That night, I thought about how many times I'd swallowed discomfort in the name of stability, how many meetings where I spoke less than I knew, how many times I'd confused loyalty with silence. The injustice hurt, but it brought clarity. Texting Christmas greetings with old friends, some responses caught my attention. People remembering projects I'd saved, crises I'd prevented, solutions nobody else would have thought of. For the first time, I saw my impact reflected outside the company that had discarded me. In the early hours of Christmas morning, I made a silent agreement with myself. I wouldn't rush to fix what others broke, wouldn't beg for spaces that were never made for me. If I restarted, it would be somewhere my experience wasn't treated as excess. That Christmas, there were no corporate toasts or empty speeches. There was something rarer, the seed of a decision that would change everything. The first call came on a gray morning, days after Christmas. My phone buzzed on the table while I updated my resume, adjusting words I never imagined needing again. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten, but I let it ring through to voicemail. Same day, 2 more calls, then messages. The tone was cautious at first, almost casual, like they were asking about a forgotten detail, not urgent help. Minor instabilities, they said. Nothing serious. I recognized the euphemism immediately. That afternoon, a message from an old colleague was more direct. Systems down. Maintenance requests frozen. Payments not processing. The kind of failure that doesn't show up in weekly reports but explodes in the daily lives of people who depend on it. I read everything without visible emotion. Didn't feel joy or satisfaction, just silent confirmation. I knew every one of those gears. Knew exactly where would appear first when nobody was there to adjust invisible details. Meanwhile, the company tried maintaining appearances. Internal communications talked about temporary adjustments and dedicated teams. But behind optimistic messages, the structure was starting to give. Systems that always worked stopped being predictable. That night, I walked through my house in silence, feeling a strange weight in my chest. Not guilt, awareness. I could solve most of this quickly. But something inside me resisted. Solving meant returning to a role that always demanded everything and offered little. For the first time, I allowed myself not to act. Not from revenge, from self-respect. Some lessons need to be felt to be learned. In the following days, my phone became a constant reminder of the past trying to pull me back. HR calls, messages too polite, voices sounding increasingly tense. They offered point consultations, temporary support, competitive rates. I listened to the messages and deleted them one by one. Every request came with urgency that never existed before when I'd asked for resources, team, or documentation. Now there was money. Now there was time. Too late. In one message, the CTO sounded exhausted. The confidence he'd displayed in the termination meeting had vanished. He spoke fast, stumbling over his own words, trying to sound in control of something clearly out of control. Sitting at my kitchen table, I held the phone a few seconds longer. Thought about the years I'd answered off-hours calls, solved invisible crises, guaranteed everything was working before anyone noticed the risk. Thought about the Christmas just passed and the silent promise I'd made myself. I put the device face down. That was harder than I'd imagined. Not responding required a different kind of strength, one I'd never been encouraged to develop, saying no without justifying myself. That same day, a different email arrived. No exaggerated urgency, no desperate tone. Short message, direct, from a competing company mentioning my work with respect and genuine curiosity. For the first time since the firing, I felt something move forward. While unanswered calls continued piling up, I opened that email slowly. Maybe, I thought, some doors only open when you have the courage not to go back through the ones that closed. The meeting was at a small coffee shop, far from mirrored buildings and cold conference rooms I'd learned to associate with power. The message had been simple: admiration for my work and genuine curiosity about how I thought about systems that needed to last decades, not quarters. The person across from me listened more than talked, asked questions nobody had asked me in years, about technical decisions, about risks, about people. Didn't ask for magic solutions or promise shortcuts. Talked about time, structure, doing things right from the start. I felt something rare in the corporate world: relief. Didn't need to defend myself, simplify, or prove my complexity had reason. For the first time in a long time, someone seemed to understand that stability isn't born from rush. The offer came without games. A position respecting my experience, autonomy to design architecture, and most important, freedom to document, train, build a team, not just a new job, a new beginning. Leaving the coffee shop, the cutting cold didn't bother me. Walking down the street, I realized I was smiling without noticing. Not from revenge or delayed validation, but from the feeling of being seen completely. That night, arriving home, I found more unanswered messages on my phone. Didn't listen to them. Instead, I sat at the table and started imagining systems that didn't exist yet. And for the first time, without fear they'd be considered too complex. Accepting the offer wasn't an impulsive decision. I spent days reflecting, evaluating risks, talking to myself in long silences. Restarting at 55 wasn't simple, especially after almost 2 decades in the same place. There was fear, of course, fear of failing, of not adapting, of proving the skeptics right. But there was something bigger: exhaustion from always being strong to sustain structures that never sustained me back. The day I replied to the email confirming my decision, I felt weight lift from my shoulders. Not euphoria, firmness. For the first time, the choice wasn't made from necessity, but from self-respect. The new environment felt different from day one. Questions were asked before decisions. Time was treated as ally, not enemy. When I talked about documentation, nobody rolled their eyes. When I talked about training, nobody called it unnecessary cost. Meanwhile, news from the old company kept arriving, even without me asking. Systems partially restored, unhappy clients, panicked executives. Financial offers doubled, then tripled. I declined them all. Choosing myself meant accepting that not every problem is mine to solve, that some structures need to collapse so new ones can be built with more awareness. At the end of that week, I walked to the new workplace parking lot with a strange, good feeling. I wasn't running from something. I was moving toward where I always should have been. The revelation didn't come dramatically, but in fragments. A message here, a comment there, information that started aligning when an old colleague asked to meet me discreetly. He looked tired, older than I remembered, like someone carrying a weight he'd finally decided to release. Between sips of cold coffee, he told me what he'd discovered in internal files, old emails exchanged long before my termination, discussing strategic cost reduction and preparation for sale. My name appeared with technical coldness that hurt more than any direct insult. I was the first target, too experienced, too expensive, hard to replace quickly, but disposable long-term, at least on paper. The plan assumed everything would stay stable long enough for the sale to close. After that, the problem would be someone else's. I heard it all in silence, no shock, just a sense of pieces finally forming an uncomfortable but coherent image. It hadn't been incompetence or personal conflict. It had been calculation. Driving home that day, I felt something unexpected: relief. The doubt that had insisted on haunting my mind dissipated. I hadn't failed, hadn't overreacted, hadn't been too sensitive. The injustice wasn't subjective, it was documented. Still, I didn't feel like confronting anyone. Knowing the truth didn't awaken a desire for explicit revenge, just reinforced my decision not to go back. Some doors, when closed that way, don't deserve to be reopened. And the real consequences? Those were already unfolding without me lifting a finger. The collapse stopped being technical and became public. Clients started complaining openly. Contracts got suspended. Historical data became inaccessible. What had been treated as excessive complexity revealed itself as a protection system nobody else knew how to operate. Expensive consultancies came in, promising quick solutions. But the more they touched, the more problems surfaced. Every layer removed without understanding opened another failure. The system wasn't broken, it was orphaned. I followed everything from a distance, through occasional messages and discreet industry news. Felt no pleasure in it. Just an unavoidable realization. What takes years to build can't be dismantled without consequences. Meanwhile, at my new job, I was advancing with something completely different. Clear documentation, continuous training, systems designed to survive anyone's absence, including mine. This was where my energy finally made sense. When the old company lost its largest client, the impact was immediate. Sale plans collapsed, leadership got questioned, speeches changed. What was once treated as cost started being called strategic error. One quiet night, I reflected on all this while looking at the city lights through my window. Some falls aren't punishments, they're delayed lessons, and not all of them need to be watched closely to be understood. I shut down my computer calmly. The past was settling its own accounts. The future, finally, was in my hands. The invitation came carefully, almost too respectfully for someone who'd been ignored before. The company where I now worked was evaluating acquisition of my old organization, weakened, pressured by losses and accumulated errors. For the first time, someone asked what I thought before deciding. I hesitated. Returning to that environment, even under new conditions, awakened memories I was still organizing inside myself. But I also saw a rare opportunity, preventing more people from paying the price of decisions they never made. I agreed to participate with one clear, non-negotiable condition. No improvising, no shortcuts. Everything needed to be documented, explained, taught. No system would depend again on silence, invisible sacrifice, or solitary heroism. When I returned to the building, now under another name and different leadership, I felt the weight of the past but didn't let it dominate me. Some people recognized me with embarrassment, others with relief. No speeches, just work to be done. I didn't return as savior or revenge symbol. I returned as transition architect, someone who knew exactly what could be salvaged and what needed to be left behind. Respect wasn't requested. It was built, step by step. For the first time, I entered those rooms knowing I didn't need to prove anything. The conditions had changed, and so had I. The following months were intense, but different from everything I'd lived before. Now there was time to plan, space to teach, people willing to learn. Every system came with clear documentation, every decision recorded, every team trained to understand the whole, not just their part. I insisted on processes previously considered too slow. Reviews, tests, redundancies. Not from perfectionism, from respect for the future. A well-built system doesn't depend on who's present, but on how it was designed. Culture started changing almost imperceptibly. People asked questions without fear. Problems got discussed before becoming crises. Knowledge stopped being concentrated power and became shared patrimony. I watched everything with quiet attention, didn't seek public recognition, but felt something new growing. Serene pride. Not from having been right in the past, but from doing better now. In a simple meeting at the end of a long day, someone commented this was the first project in years that actually felt sustainable. I smiled slightly. That was it. Sustainable, human, lasting. I knew this phase was reaching its end, not as abrupt closure, but as conscious transition. The work was being passed forward, as it always should have been. 1 year later, Christmas arrived differently. Lights glowed in the hallways again, but now there were fewer rehearsed speeches and more real conversations. I walked through the building with calm steps, without the rush that once defined my days. Everything worked, not by accident, but by care. The transition was complete. Integrated systems, trained teams, documentation accessible to everyone. Nothing depended on a single person anymore. For me, that was the greatest victory of all. Building something that didn't need me to keep existing. At the year's last meeting, nobody talked about cuts or empty optimizations. They talked about learning, responsibility, future. When they mentioned my name, it was with gratitude, not urgency. I listened, thanked them, moved forward. That afternoon, leaving early, I drove along the lake, watching winter sky reflected in calm water. I remembered the previous Christmas, the cardboard box, the heavy silence, the doubt that almost made me question myself. Everything felt distant now, not from forgetting, from overcoming. At home, family waited. Laughter, simple food, human warmth. No notification interrupted the moment. No system demanded immediate attention. For the first time in many years, I was whole where I was. I understood then that I hadn't defeated anyone. Didn't need revenge, proof, or confrontation. My response to injustice had been silent, constant, deeply transformative. Moving forward, building better, letting time reveal the value of what's done with truth. That Christmas, I toasted not to the past, but to the future. A future where experience isn't disposable, where work done right has space to grow, where nobody needs to disappear for others to feel important, and in silence, I felt the peace that only comes when you choose yourself.